Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Coffee Chat with CastleHill. Today, I'm joined by Elaine Duffus from Wolters Kluwer, and we're going to be talking about some of the upcoming trends and information in the ESG space and how it's impacting financial services firms, banking firms, any of those different areas. So, thanks, Elaine, for joining me again. Maybe just to make sure that folks remember you, just give a little bit of a background about your role at Wolters Kluwer and your background in the financial services industry.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Thanks a lot for having me today. So I'm a former career compliance officer and attorney, and now a senior specialized consultant with Wolters Kluwer. And Wolters Kluwer is a global provider of professional information solutions and services. And in my division, we provide financial service firms worldwide with regulatory compliance solutions, including our Reg Change data feed.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So let's jump right into it because there is so much to talk about in this space right now, and it's really difficult. And we're actually just to throw the put the promo in now. We're there's going to be an associated webinar for this that we'll be doing in a few weeks. And so if folks are listening to this and or seeing one of these sections, we'll have a webinar associated with this, as I mentioned, just talking about how to automate some of these capabilities. But let's step back for a second. And one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about is this is there's many different regulators who have taken an interest in the ESG space, and they're really pushing a lot of information out into the industry. And so all these forward-looking statements, how are we, how do we manage this? How do we deal with the fire hose of different information that's coming through? Make sure that we're not missing something. Make sure that we're seeing the right things from the right regulators.
Tim, this ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance criteria or factors have been around for many years, and every financial service firm, insurers, banks, securities firms, all have ways of dealing with different elements of it. But what's happened recently with the, which we're all aware of, the weather events, the flooding, and it's so many things related to climate change, the social upheaval that's been going on in the past couple of years, um, and what role can corporate governance play in addressing some of those things from the standpoint of these financial service entities and companies. And so the shift seems to be coming from changing to rather, um, what can how can we serve our shareholders, for example? How can we serve our banking customers, our insurance customers? And it's getting broader now. What can we also do in our business model for almost the greater good, uh, because frankly we have to. And when I think about what a compliance officer, as a former CCO, I think about what I'd be doing if I was still in that chair today. And it reminds me a lot of what happened in 2001 post 9/11 to anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing laws, rules, and regulations. They existed beforehand, but after that they took on an enormous new focus, and suddenly firms had to be looking at their entire business model to see where their risks were, and this seems to be what's happening here today. This is not something you're just going to look in, and how does this affect me in the boardroom, or uh, things like that. This is going from one end of your value chain to the other. And I'm sorry, I think I went off on a little bit of a tangent there to respond to your question.
No, it's an important aspect of it because so the sort of the theme was how do we deal with the fact that there's a lot of information coming very quickly, right? So all the regulators are putting out information. Totally agree with your point. This has been around, right? This is something which is there already. It's a different perspective, perhaps, just like it was in the example you gave after 9/11. But how, maybe look back at that history, and how did you have to look at the company differently, right? And how do you have to look at the regulatory bodies differently to be successful in dealing with those changes?
You're absolutely right. And what, again, putting myself back in that former position to think, what should I, or what should I be doing? It really would probably start. I worked with some global organizations, so in that case, I'd be looking to some of these global standard setters, like the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, or IOSCO, the Basel Committee. Different to start giving us some guidance, and indeed they're doing so. Um, and then to go from there to look at who do I care about as an organization, who supervises me, who's examining me, um, and and also uh, the places where I get horizon scanning type of information, like guidance, FATF and the and different international organizations that might weigh in on this. The FSOC probably looms larger, and then to look and see, what the political landscape, of course, in the U.S. particularly, is looming very large because the Biden administration is really looking at this at ESG as a whole of government problem, and so every regulator is involved in one way or another. So you might even have to look across your organization to see, okay, well, I'm a bank, but I've got a broker dealer, and maybe I have an insurance sub, and all, and you're going to have to really do that enterprise risk, which would be expected to see, how do these criteria and different factors under ESG impact those different areas, and am I dealing with it in the same way, if that's possible, across the organization? Because I should be in most cases.
To the aspect of it where if I'm a smaller financial services firm of some sort, so maybe I'm just a regional in the US or Canada or somewhere else, my focus traditionally as a CCO may be just on the people who are examining me, right, keeping it fairly tight. But this is one of those times where the people that impact the global organizations, the Basel and Bank of England and a number of other areas, what they're doing is really starting to push the envelope for everybody. I think, and I think that's been some of the interesting piece what you see from the regulations. The head of Department of New York's Department of Financial Services has been very vocal and very active in setting a lot of these things. And so, even if you're not doing any business in New York State, a lot of other regulators seem to be looking at that information. Are you seeing that in the Wolters Kluwer content as well?
Absolutely, and you spoke a little bit about the global factor there. The EU and UK, in fact, are way ahead of the curve on this compared to some other countries, and even APAC may even be farther ahead than we are here in the US. Um, EU, particularly over, I think probably it started around 2017, started releasing numerous directives and regulations that are related to climate risk, sustainability, shareholders' rights, and those efforts are already beginning to have an impact. Bloomberg reported yesterday that European banks are beginning to look at their clients and figure out, do they pose more of a risk in this climate space, for example. Um, and if so, are we willing to take on those higher capital requirements because we're accepting that risk? So there's decisions being made. Um, so for that smaller firm, I would look to where there's been some established regulation already. Maybe you're not going to make any hard and fast decisions or change policies as a result, but it certainly would keep you plugged in on probably where the wind is blowing. And frankly, here in the U.S., things are moving very quickly now, and I would tell anybody to do, if you need to be better informed on this topic, doing searches, just simple searches. It's amazing the amount of information out there, and to help narrow down what you need to care about. Um, Automating something like your reg change process, where everything begins, everything touches that, would be would be a probably an instrumental piece of all that.
So let's twist it around a little bit for a second. So one of the areas that in the U.S. at least that was moving fairly rapidly a couple years ago was more in the investment securities side of the world, where BlackRock and other companies really started quickly creating models to determine what the governance risk was for a particular company, and some of their environmental and social aspects as well. And I think that at least and to some extent, I believe that has caused people to think of this as just an investment problem, right? But the example of the ECB, looking or companies that are regulated by the ECB starting to shed assets that are potentially going to increase their capital buffers, and that side of it, that's really hard hitting across all industries. Where how are we going to be able to measure some of these other areas? The social aspects, the environmental pieces of it. Are the regulators able to put that forward? Even thinking back to past experience of other types of similar activities.
Well, I can tell you that for the SEC, there's another aspect besides ensuring your disclosures are correct and proper. They issued a sample or comment letter last month, I think, and there were a number of elements on it that may come up as as questions from the SEC for public filings, and they one of the biggest things, I think one of the hardest hitting things that they mentioned on there was if you have they're going to compare your voluntary filing of a corporate or posting of a corporate social responsibility report, which a lot of firms do. They're going to look at that and compare your SEC filing to that, and then ask you, why is this CSR so much more expansive? In other words, and I think the term for it now is greenwashing, in that we're saying that our company does all these wonderful things in service to climate change or some other element of ESG, when in fact, if you kick the box, it's kind of empty.
So the examiners are using all the tools out there to say you're making all sorts of disclosures in this context, but in the formal one, you're toning it way down.
Exactly, and there's just so many areas to look across for and to think about how they might even come down and affect a lending decision. We touched on a little bit earlier in a banking situation, or whether I'm going to bring an insurance customer on, or what I have to disclose in a security space. So the climate change looms large, but also just sustainability. Period. What effect is our organization having on the environment, and vice versa, are there effects the environment's having on our assets that needs to be considered or disclosed to our stakeholders? Um, how about the building that you're housed in? Is that, is it like a, green building, or, there's all these things that come into play, and they were all under the environmental piece, under the social criteria. Well, and it's not just your customers who care about these things, and of course your regulators, but your employees may care. They're going to look under that social criteria, things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Uh, your human rights stance, your workplace safety and benefits, things like that. Labor relations. They're looking at all that. That's all under that social factors, and more. I'm just hitting the really the top here. But and that's one of the problems too, is we there is no one definition on what does ESG mean, for everyone. There just isn't. Now we again can look at those global standard setters to help get us there. Hopefully, we're not there yet though. So I'm going through some topics that may fall under each one of these things, but In fact, as I say, there's many more that could be very different for your organization. Um, and just to wrap it up with the governance piece, I think we mentioned board diversity, executive compensation is a big piece. SEC and others care a lot about that too, and probably your customers and certainly your employees. Who are you contributing to as a company politically? Things like that. And of course, anti-corruption and bribery, that's always loomed somewhat large. And speaking right to the compliance people, do you really have that independence to go talk to your board or anytime you need to and raise issues? They're looking very closely at all that, and it's all coming under this large rubric of ESG.
And it's so pervasive across the whole company. So one of the challenges, and I don't know if you face this as a CCO, is making sure that the rest of the organization is aware of these things, right? Being able to distribute it in an efficient way and get the information out to the impacted parties. I know the industry has evolved a lot. Have we evolved far enough?
Well, in my experience, and as I mentioned, I actually at Wolters Kluwer, I'm speaking to financial service institutions every day about how they conduct their uh, compliance program management. And surprisingly, there are still those that remain in a manual mode using Excel or Access databases or things like that, SharePoint, to conduct their reg change and their risk assessments and all that. And frankly, probably the days of being able to continue to do that are behind us, since every regulator is now and has been for some time, but as we say, it's getting more and more taking on more of a priority to have that enterprise view of your risk. You've got to make those connections, and when something comes into your point a minute ago, if something comes to my attention, uh, maybe it was a speech that the Fed made, and they really made this point about where they're headed on some ESG element, and I want to get that off to my board ASAP and make sure that they've seen it and understand it and contact me if they don't. Think of the how that would happen in a manual sense. I know because I did it for years, and that is a number of emails flying around. I have to save them somewhere to show, when did they know and how did they know it, and here it is in this folder. And then and then say I leave the company, where are those records now? So to me, there's as complicated as things have become, even without ESG, but now adding this, these issues on top of all that the compliance departments and companies have to manage today. There really isn't another way to do it, in my view, but to automate that process and to connect those things that need to be connected, whether it's the different subsidiaries they're all doing something about AML or about privacy or about one of these ESG criteria, um, and to then connect that to, well, what training, as you mentioned earlier, what training have we provided around this topic and this topic, and do we need to train around this thing? And then you're even showing um, that process of deciding to do or not do something, that's all documented as it should be, because a regulator might not be able to say you're wrong, but because you made a business decision about something, but they could say you didn't even, consider this thing, and you didn't even look at it and weigh its risks to your organization. So the connections need to be made and the record kept more fulsomely.
I think, and that leads into one of the, I think, themes that's also coming through from an ESG perspective is that, uh, you know, qualitative analysis is one aspect of it that people are sort of doing at the moment, but some quantitative analysis of the information, scenario, building. And I can't imagine how you're doing effective scenario analysis if you're not looking at the full gamut of what's coming down the road. So, like I said, I think maybe how important are those speeches? in my experience, we sometimes have organizations that they don't really pay a whole lot of attention to those more forward-looking activities. But it also seems in the last couple of years that the content itself has become a lot more consistent. That the regulators are following sort of a similar story when they're laying out some of these forward guidance items. Is that fair, or is that am I losing it?
No, you're not losing it. That's been the case for many years in my experience, that that speeches were always the shot over your bow to let you know, and sometimes it was just a testing of the waters by a regulator to see how, at a conference, say for example, to see how the industry reacted to whatever they had to share. That's certainly happening today with ESG topics. Um, and as I say, there are so many regulators who have got a dog in this fight, that, and so many that would probably impact just an average bank, or BD, or uh, IA insurance company, what have you. Um, Again, if you're going to do your horizon scanning properly, you've got to look at things like, another example are the blogs. A lot of them have today, and they're putting things in there that don't come out in any other guidance or anything. I think uh, the OCC has a blog that, and they're not putting these things out anywhere else. And it's not a law, rule, or regulation, of course, but it does give you a sense of what they're thinking about that topic, and how things are probably going to play out as the uh, as the process to put regulations together and guidance around these topics evolves.
To the one other area that I know we touch on a lot when we're talking to prospects and to customers is it's not just what's inside your house, right? It's all of the third parties and nth parties, and doing that as well, and really looking at those pieces. And I think that's just another one of those touch points, because it may be that your third party risk management or your vendor management team is focused on those regulations, but the impact at a board level is much greater than it's ever been in the past. Is that, where is that going to continue to get worse? Is it going to continue to be a focus for the examiners?
Absolutely, and every industry examinations priority letter I've seen from the various regulators have all mentioned ESG prominently. Um, and in fact, you mentioned third parties. That's also a very big focus. It has been for a few years now, but now another element of that relationship that you have with the third party has to be looked at now through this new lens of ESG. Uh, so I'm not entirely certain that I would know even what that would all look like. There's just so much more to be done to figure out what's my questionnaire that I want to send to them, or something like that. We're not even at that point. There's probably some basic things people could come up with, but we're not even at the point yet, at least in the U.S. here, um, about what exactly that looks like. It's still a little squishy. There's some things that are more obvious than others, but in underwriting, some coal mining or something like that. But when you get away from the obvious stuff, it gets a lot more squishy and unknown.
I remember when Dodd-Frank came out, there was a lot of conversation about the level of information that was in there. But obviously, I don't know what the current statistic is, but some relatively medium percentage of the whole Dodd-Frank Act has actually been implemented in many cases, because of the complexity of the information that's required and some of the other things like that. I feel, and I'm looking for your opinion on this. I feel that ESG, we're going through that same cycle of trying to figure out how these are going to be implemented, but even without the framework yet of a Dodd Frank, certainly in the U.S. Is that fair, or have you seen enough specific regulations out there to?
No, I would say you're right on the money. And Dodd-Frank's a good example of that, where some of it depends even on how the political winds are blowing. You may have an administration who thinks, oh, full steam ahead, let's get these things implemented. and then you may have somebody who says pump the brakes. We're going to take another look at this, even though it was decided a long time ago. You know, we have section. There's a section coming out right now, 1071 of Dodd Frank that's been languishing for many years, and that'll continue to evolve as you and happen. Um, so yeah, I would agree that this certainly will take on elements of that as our uh, the sort of political will and how the frankly how the people feel about these continue to feel about these topics. But it does seem like when you have so many people being personally affected by things like we mentioned early on, like these crazy weather events and as I say, the sort of societal upheaval and protests about different things. Um, these are we're going to have to address these to the point we can do anything about them from the perspective of these financial service entities, um, and try to make a positive impact, without impacting the bottom line where you shouldn't be. It's going to be and it is a balancing act that's like most of these large regulatory changes are. A lot of choices to be made. Yeah.
It'll be really, I mean, I just can't say enough how much the horizon scanning type of thing and all those guidance letters and having a strong process in place to manage those pieces is going to be to people, because we are going to just have repeated events that will drive new guidance, as opposed to a large financial crisis. Oh, that ended in air quotes, right, or whenever it did, or whatever the impacts are, and now we have regulation to try to stop it from happening again. We're sort of in a long series of events that the regulatory bodies are going to continue to react to, with a very big set of variables associated with public's impression as well as governmental side of it. So is that really the most critical piece, is getting that process down?
Oh, I absolutely believe that it is. Um, when you're talking about these different, a lot of people don't even think about it, I guess, but these every one of these regulatory bodies has, several types of releases that they put out, and they're if it's going to be about a reg filing, that's what it's called, and then there might be something just called press releases, and that could cover the gamut of stuff. But with automation, and speeches are another good example of something that you could care about something in there, or maybe you don't. But something that automation can do to help you get there is by tagging. Um, is probably the most prevalent feature that automation can have today. That if it doesn't hit one of these topics that you're looking for, then nobody has to look at it, and you're saving resources. If it does, of course, there's going to have to be a deeper dive. But in the old way of doing things, the manual way of doing things, every single thing has to be looked at and then somehow pull out what matters and put it somewhere that someone will see it, and it's just uh, it's just really not sustainable.
Not to use one of our buzzwords, yes, not sustainable.
Exactly. I was looking for another one, but that's what came to me.
um, so I know we're just about out of time. So anything that we haven't touched on, I know that you feel is important for our listeners to think about.
Well, I would urge everyone to stay in touch with their industry associations, respond to those surveys that they put out. Even Wolters Kluwer, we put out a survey too on risk surveys and compliance surveys, and let them know what's. I mean, all of them are featuring ESG, of course, in the last year or so. But do let your opinion be known and let your concerns be known about uh, where things are headed in your organization, and respond to uh, proposals. Really dig into them and see as an organization, how tenable that is for you. And a lot of companies don't respond to proposals anymore or put in comment letters. They rely on their industry association, which is fine. But this could hurt. If down the road, if you don't make your voice heard. So because you don't want them to go really beyond what's sensible and reasonable.
It's almost an aspect of the corporate governance to prove that you're paying attention and actually participating in the process overall.
That's a good point. Yes.
Thanks, Elaine. I really appreciate you spending the time and look forward to our webinar in a few weeks. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and really appreciate you joining.
Okay. Thank you.
I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode of Coffee Chat with CastleHill. For more episodes, insights, and discussion, check us out on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or at our website, www.castlehillrisk.com. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll see you next time on a Coffee Chat with CastleHill.